I want to start a video series about this really interesting book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity. If you don't know anything about C.S. Lewis, it says here on the flap that he lived from 1898 to 1963, and that he was arguably one of the most influential Christian writers in his day. You probably know him better from the Chronicles of Narnia series. So what I really want to do with this series is go through this book and summarize it chapter by chapter and gain some interest and see if we can get some discussions going. So just a quick word of background is that the contents of this book were originally given as talks on the radio by C.S. Lewis, and they were later transcribed and edited and put together to make up this book. One of the reasons that I like this book so much is because of the readability. And C.S. Lewis has put this book together in such a way that it's not just for Christians to read, but anyone can really read it and understand the basics of Christianity, because it's not up at this high theological level, but it rather breaks it down into human nature and our own personal interests and motivations, so it's easy to understand no matter what background you're from. So this book is split up into 4 books that each have their own chapters, and the one that I'm going to start with is chapter 1, which is called Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And the first chapter that I'm going to go over now is called The Law of Human Nature. Quite often we hear people arguing with each other, adults as well as children. We hear them say things like, "How'd you like it if anyone did the same to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Why did you do that to him? He wasn't doing anything to you. Give me a bit of your food. I gave you some of mine. And come on, you promised." These are all things that we've heard people say. Whenever someone says this type of thing, it's because of something that someone has done to them that doesn't please them. He's appealing to a standard of behavior that he expects everyone to know about. And the other person never really tries to argue with this standard. They just try to find an excuse for it or work their way around it to make it sound like they weren't really doing anything wrong. It seems that both of these people had in their minds some kind of law or rule of fair play, some sort of standard of how you should act. This sense of decency that we expect from people is called the law of nature. And this isn't the law of nature like gravity or physics or anything like that, but it's the law of human nature. It's interesting to note that it's different from the laws of nature like gravity, which you can't choose to obey or disobey, but the laws of human nature, everyone can and does choose to obey or disobey. It's called the law of nature because there's this notion that everyone knows this law. They're not taught it, it's just ingrained in them. Now, every once in a while, you'll come along someone who claims that they don't know about these laws of nature, but overall, as a race, we understand these, and we are expected to live by some standard of decent behavior. Now, I know you may be thinking about all the different civilizations and all of the eras that the human civilization has gone through, and you may be saying that they have completely different moralities, but in fact, they're not so different. Think of a country with people who admired soldiers who ran away from battle, or gave respect to people who betrayed the people closest and kindest to them. People have many different opinions regarding who you should put first, whether it be your family or your nation or whoever, but it's typically held a general idea that you should put others first, and selfishness is not a good thing. People have disagreed over whether you should have 1 wife or 4, but they've generally agreed that you shouldn't be able to just have any woman that you like. This is generally not an admirable characteristic. What's really interesting about this law of right and wrong is that you'll find people go back on it after they've stated their belief in it, and they'll say, that wasn't fair. You'll have a country that signs a treaty, and then they'll go back on it. But if there was no law of right or wrong in the first place, then who's to say whether it was a fair treaty or an unfair treaty to begin with? So it seems then that we're forced to believe in this idea of right and wrong. And another interesting thing is that none of us really adhere completely to this law. We as humans don't always behave the way that we expect people to behave. We don't all always abide by the golden rule and do unto others as we would wish have done unto us. And we always try to make excuses for it, why we were acting the way we did, but we still all do believe in this law of nature and this concept of right and wrong. If we didn't have this idea of right and wrong, then why are we always so hasty to come up with some sort of excuse for when we behaved in a way that someone didn't like, or we were at fault? The truth is that we believe in this law of decency so much, and we feel so pressured by it that we try to avoid it and try to make up excuses and blame it on other circumstances. So the first point of all of this is that human beings all over the earth have this idea of right and wrong, and have this idea of a certain standard of behavior that we're expected to live by, and we can't really get this idea out of our head. It's ingrained into us. The second point is that we all break this law. We know the law of nature, but we still break it. So that concludes Chapter 1 of Book 1 for this video. Chapter 2 is called Some Objections, and for the next video I'm planning on skipping over that chapter just because it's a little too in-depth for the scope of what I want to cover in this series. So I'm going to skip right to Chapter 3 after this video, which is called The Reality of the Law. Stay tuned, let me know what you think. Thanks.